Hello, everybody. It's Ezekiel Johnson here again, and we're going to do part two of section two. It's a beautiful day out. The birds are singing, the kids are playing, so you're going to hear all kinds of noises behind me, but that's all part of life. That's all good. So we're going to start off with this. Now, we just ended up talking about the pirates and how bad they were for America. What's happening over in France? That's the next story. Over in France, I'm reading off a lot of notes that I have, and by the way, I want to apologize. Mr. Johnson forgot to give you all the notes for section two. I'm going to have to tell him about that. But as far as I know, the notes are already there for you. So you can go to his site that he put you on and you can find his notes. All right. So go ahead and get those notes for section two because we're going to be talking about this right now. Now, in the 18th century, when is the 18th century? What years would those be? 1700s. That's right. In the 1700s, France, being involved with that revolution that we had, and with fighting with the British and the spending of King Louis XVI, put them in a hurting way. That's right. They were broke. France was broke. And so the only way to get money is how? To raise taxes. So the king started to raise taxes on a lot of people, right? Not only were everything empty as far as like their bank accounts, you might say, for the country, but there was famine. Uh, there was decades of drought. There was cattle disease. There was skyrocketing bread prices. Everything was going bad for them. All right. So many expressed their desperation and resentment towards the king and towards his raising taxes, like everybody does. But didn't that just happen with the English and the Americans in the Revolution? Exactly the same thing. So now it's happening to France. Well, on August 4th, 1789, there was an assembly that was adopted to meet, and they adopted something called the Declaration of Rights of Man. The Declaration of Rights of Man. And guess who helped them put some of this together? A man that we know, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, as Secretary of State, was over there and he was tinkering and helping them write some of this. Now, not officially, but unofficially, because officially you can't do that. But unofficially, he was giving some of his words and some of his phrases to the people that were writing this Declaration of Rights of Man. How about that? So, people at this time wanted to riot, they wanted to steal things from other people, they were just out of their minds. And so now this comes about. This was a statement of democratic principles grounded on the philosophical and political ideas of the Enlightenment. Remember the Enlightenment? Well, sure you do. Now, by April 1792, was George Washington president? Of course he was. He was already president. This new legislative assembly declared war on Austria and Prussia. Why would they do that? They believed that French people were building a counter revolutionary alliance with these people. You understand what I'm saying? So there were revolutionaries, just like we had here, and they were trying to build alliances with other countries to go against the French. The king's not going to like that, right? So they also hoped that they could spread its revolutionary ideas across Europe through different types of warfare and maybe get people to help them. Well, at this time, England is worrying about themselves. What's England got to do about all this? Because England still has a king. And England and other countries that had kings were worried that if this is happening in France, maybe it would start happening in their own country. So they're starting to bind together and they may end up fighting some of these revolutionaries. But they don't want to fight King Louis XVI. They don't want to start a whole big war like that again. So they're already starting to form ideas and think about what they can do to preserve their own countries. But that's another whole story. See, we could really get into this really deep, but we just don't have time. So, um, the National Convention was divided by these two types of groups. One group was called the Garodians, and the other group was called the Montagnards. Now, what they felt was that the people, the normal people, the people that go out and work for a living, that aren't rich, that really have to do a lot, should have more of an opportunity to vote. You see, the rich people were voting and the nobles were voting, and really 98% of the vote should have went to the poorer people, the middle class people, if there was such a thing as a middle class. But the rich people were voting for them, and they didn't like that. They wanted to vote for themselves. So these two groups were supporting those types of people, the people that were the underdogs. You understand what I'm saying? So on the domestic front, the political crisis took a radical turn when another group called the Jacobins, they were a radical group, attacked the royal palace. They attacked the royal palace. Wow. Now, let's step back just a little bit, okay? There was a place called the Bastille. Now, the Bastille was basically just a jail. It was a prison, okay? But inside that prison, they had an arsenal. They had gunpowder. They had muskets. They had anything you think. Now, who would put that inside of a prison? I don't know. And most of the people that were in prison were political prisoners. They came against the king or they didn't pay their taxes. Now, of course, there were some bad people, and there's some really bad people. But these Jacobins, they broke in that Bastille, and they got the gunpowder, and they got the muskets, and they released all the prisoners, good and bad, good and bad, because they wanted them to join their side. But they had something else in mind. A few years later, after they took the Bastille in 1789, this is 1792, they're going to storm the palace where the king is and the queen. The first thing they do is they start attacking these nobles and these people that have money, and they kill them. They're killing them. Then they go for the king. Uh, the royal palace was attacked on August 10th, 1792. 1792. The following month, a wave of violence in which French insurrectionists would start to massacre hundreds of these people that were against the revolution. So if you were against the revolution, they came after you and they murdered you. Wow. Can you imagine that even happening? Can you imagine that? Just because you don't believe in somebody's political ideas, they would go as far as murdering you? Well, they did. And most of those people were nobles. They had money. They had position. What about the king? He's the highest noble of all, right? He wasn't exempt. No, he wasn't. Because the legislative assembly would be replaced by the National Assembly. So, see, the revolutionaries were taken over by revolutionaries, which proclaimed the abolition of the monarchy. In other words, what's abolition mean? It means get rid of. They're going to get rid of the monarchy. And the establishment now of what they called the French Republic. They took over the government. Now, wait a second. Let's back up a little bit. So, you had revolutionaries that took over the National Assembly, who was made up of these Gironians and Montagnards, and the radicals, the Jacobins, they took over. And what did they call themselves? The National Convention. Wow. So you had revolutionaries taking over revolutionaries. It's a mess. It's a real mess there. Now, on January 21st, 1793, it sent King Louis XVI to jail. They arrested him, and they arrested his wife too, and they condemned him to death. How are they going to kill the king? You know what they did? They like to cut those heads off, don't they? They like to cut those heads off, but they had a better machine to cut the heads off than just with an axe or just with a sword. They put him to jail, and they would put him to death for treason and crimes against the state. They would use a machine called the guillotine. The guillotine. They put your head in there, you lay like this, and a blade comes down, whoosh, cut your head right off. Flops in a basket. It's not a pleasant way to die. It's not. So they did kill King Louis on the 21st of January, 1793. And then just a few months later, they killed his wife. That's right. Not only did he die, but his wife would die by both having their heads cut off. Now you realize that almost 17,000 people would be killed by that machine? 17,000. Wow. Unknown numbers died in prison. Many, many people died in prison that were completely innocent. We think we're going through a hard time. This is a real hard time because people are losing their lives by being beheaded. Beheaded. We don't want that. So they were executed. And by July of 1794, 85% of the people that were executed were just ordinary people. So the Jacobins, they were not good people. Now, during this time, um, America would be asked to help. Now, why is that? Why should we help? Well, let me tell you. There was a man that would come over, and his name was Edmund Genet. Edmund Genet was a revolutionary, and he would ask for President Washington's help. Now, just in April 1793, President Washington issued an order. It was called the Proclamation of Neutrality Act. Now, why did he do that? Well, the king had been killed in January. A few months later, his wife had been killed over in France. And now Washington had this order called the Proclamation of Neutrality. And what it said was, we are not going to support England and we are not going to support France. We just want to make money both ways. You understand? And the only way we can make money is to keep trading. We have to keep trading. Now, there was a problem within Washington's cabinet. You see, Thomas Jefferson, he supported the French. He said, well, they're revolutionaries just like we were, and they helped us. Then we should be helping them. But see, we can't make any money from them. And on the other hand, Alexander Hamilton supported the British. Because let's face it, that's where the money is. All right? That's where the money is. And so these two men argued so much about this that Washington had to walk out of the room. He really did. He eventually gave it to both of them. You can't do this. We have to decide what we're going to do. So when he came up with this Proclamation of Neutrality, he said, we will trade with both of these countries, but we will support neither one of them in this war. Because now England is going to start to want to fight these revolutionaries. Well, the king is dead. He's going to want to fight these revolutionaries. It sounds like a world war, doesn't it? Don't drag us into it. Don't drag us into it. I already fought in one war. Well, I fought in a couple different wars, and I don't want to do another one, especially when it's not on our own territory. It's someplace else. So he warned that the United States would be friendly and impartial against the British or the French, and anybody that was on the high seas flying our flag that got in trouble, you're on your own. What's that mean? It means that if you're flying this flag back here and you get caught helping one of those other countries, England or France, and they put you in prison, we're not going to come help you because he's already told you we're not supporting either one of those. We are neutral. We are in the middle. Now, let's get back to this man, Edmund Genet, because I want you to think about him for a second. Edmund Genet comes over here and he starts riling up the people to support the French, handing out leaflets, giving speeches, getting very well known in Philadelphia, all different places in Boston. He even gets a couple ships and starts to outfit them with cannons to do, you know what, go against the British. He's using our ships, outfitting them with cannons to fight the British. It's going to look like that we are fighting the British. We can't have that. It'll be another war. And we just cannot survive another war right now. So he goes to talk to President Washington. Washington knows what he's doing. And he listens to him with everybody else standing in the room. Jefferson, Hamilton, they were all standing in the room. Henry Knox was there, Secretary of War. And Edmund Genet says, you will help us. Because there was a treaty called the Treaty of Alliance. You remember Treaty of Alliance? 1778 said that you will help us if we help you. Now we're calling on that help. We can't help you. Washington said, we can't help you. For one thing, that treaty was made with King Louis XVI, and they cut his head off. Oh, treaty's gone. That doesn't make a difference. Well, it makes a big difference. That treaty was signed by King Louis XVI, not by you, Mr. Genet. And you will stop all of this propaganda that you're doing in our country, or I will put you in jail. Or even better yet, send you back to France. Can't do that, he said, because the revolutionaries that took over our revolutionaries would kill me. Well, you better behave yourself. Genet would not give up. And he kept on and he kept on and he kept on until finally came a point where Washington told him, this is it. You will not spread this propaganda anymore. Finally stopped. He got the message. He got the message. He thought Washington was a pushover, and with all of his charm, he could charm Washington. Washington got mad. Oh, yeah. General got mad, and Genet stopped. He eventually became a citizen, guess where? The good old USA, where everybody wants to be. That's where he ended up. That's where he ended up. Now, under the treaty that we had made, the Treaty of Alliance, it should be important that we should help, but we did make it with the King of France, and that treaty is now gone. So we can't do that. So Washington had to remain neutral, not get involved. We didn't get involved. We just didn't. So what happens with that revolution? Let me go on a little far. I'm not going to go too far with this because I could spend the whole time talking about the French Revolution. But the first group, the group they took over at first, the let me see, what was it called again? Not the National Convention, but the Legislative Assembly. They took over again. How'd they do that? I thought they were wiped out. They weren't wiped out. They were led by a man named Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a general, and he helped destroy Jacobins. Well, guess what they did? They put him in charge. In charge of what? In charge of the country. The military took over the country. As happens a lot of times, the military takes over the country. In this case, it was a good thing. And Napoleon Bonaparte claimed himself as ruler of France. But he went a little too far. Later on, he would claim himself Emperor of France. Uh-oh. That's even more than a king, isn't it? Emperor's like a Caesar. He was thinking about taking over the whole world. How far do you think he's going to get? Well, that's another story. We can't go in that today. Old Napoleon. You know, he wasn't a very big guy. Don't need to be big to be in charge. You just need to be smart. And he was very, very smart. People liked him. And he implemented rules and laws that the French still use today. He was good for France. He really was. Remember, he was for the small guy, and he was really good for France. And so they still use some of those laws today. But we'll talk about what happens to Napoleon later on. That'll be maybe next chapter. Any case, there is another problem. And the problem is with England. Well, I thought we dealt with that problem. No, we didn't. Because what England was doing was they were stopping U.S. merchant ships, all of our trading ships, and they were boarding the ships up, and they were going to see if any of those fellas that were on that ship were English sailors that deserted the English Navy. Now, even if they weren't, sometimes they would impress them. You know what the word impress means? It's not impressing you like with my fine clothes that I have on today. No, it means kidnapping. So they were kidnapping our sailors. Now, to be right, every once in a while they would find a British soldier or British sailor that deserted. Or for the most part, they're taking our own men. Now, how would they know? Do they speak American, right? A lot of men still had English accents. Everybody still had a bit of an English accent. So they were taking our men. Alexander Hamilton still supported the British, and Washington figured there's got to be something done here. There's got to be something done. So we need to maybe send somebody over to England and deal with the British to stop impressing our sailors and stop taking any of our cargo. Well, in the meantime, we still have this Proclamation of Neutrality Act, right? Alexander Hamilton went behind George Washington's back and told the British that we really wouldn't support that anyway. Can you imagine that? Here's a Secretary of Treasury going behind the president's back and talking to the British, who basically could be our enemies. That's treason. It really is. Now, they didn't catch him on it, not till way later when he discovered that maybe he had done this, but he did do it. He did. This would leave our envoy or our ambassador over there with very little leverage to change the British minds. And the man that Washington's going to send over there is John Jay. Remember John Jay? Smart man. John Jay goes over there, and he is sent to England to work out a treaty. And eventually, he comes up with a treaty called the Jay Treaty. Not very inventive, is it? Nah, not very. In any case, out of the Jay Treaty, he talks about a lot of things. And one thing is the border that is between Canada and the good old USA. That border is established now. Wasn't too hard to figure it out, was it? We got all those Great Lakes up there, but the border was established. Also, the United States merchant ships can trade with the British West Indies. All those islands down there, we can still trade with them and not be hindered, not be stopped. That helps the British out too. So they're going to like that. The other thing is the United States is supposed to provide repayment for private debts to England from the Revolutionary War. Now, wait a second. Isn't that the problem that we got into that Revolutionary War, that we were paying debts from the French and Indian War? Why in the world would you ever think of doing that? See, sometimes when they make these treaties, they accept things that they shouldn't accept. And that's exactly what he did. Now, what about the whole thing about impressing our sailors? Well, that's a mite prickly right there. Because you were allowed to board our ships, they say, and look for our men. And if you think that they still were British, you could take them. So in other words, nothing's changed. Boy, the people didn't like that. People didn't like that. The Jay's Treaty was immensely unpopular with all the American people because as they started to read it out, people didn't like that because they had fathers and sons and brothers and uncles that were being taken and not being returned, and they were being basically like slaves to the English Navy. That's not good. That's not good for anybody. So it did go to the Senate, and it went on a 20-10 vote, July 24th, 1795. President Washington, believe it or not, became very unpopular. Can you imagine that? Here's George Washington. He's one of the most popular presidents. Oh, that's right. He's the first president. So I guess you couldn't really say he was any different than anybody else because he was the very first one. He was very unpopular at the time for allowing that to happen. But you have to realize what Washington was talking about. Do the people want war with Britain, or they just want a treaty and have peace? You can't have it both ways. If we would have just not agreed to any of their terms, or even met with them, it's a real possibility that we would have went to war with Britain. It's a very, very, very possibility. So to keep the peace, Washington had to agree for the short time to the Jay Treaty. I wouldn't want to be president, I'll tell you that. Too many decisions to make. And if you make the wrong one, or even sometimes when you make the right one, you become very unpopular. Kind of mind you today, don't it? Well, let's go on a little bit. They made the Jay Treaty. Alexander Hamilton gave a speech on it. They threw rocks at him. They threw rocks at him. I gotta say, he might have deserved a few things. Maybe not too many rocks, but he did bring it on himself because he supported the Jay Treaty. He supported everything that was in it because he is pro-British. How do you think that made Thomas Jefferson feel? Well, I'm sure he gloated just a little bit. Jefferson didn't agree with it. No, didn't agree with it at all. And those two would still be tangling for a little while longer until both of them would give President Washington their resignations. He had to accept them. He had to. Didn't want to. Had to accept them. Because we made that deal with England, Spain was a little nervous. Well, maybe that would lead to alliance of England and America. Where's Spain? Where's that leave them? Well, they are dealing with the Mississippi River still, and they still control that one city down in New Orleans. It has all of our trade going through it. That's not good. So we send somebody down there because they're asking for a treaty with Spain. Now, they're right on the other side of the Mississippi River. That's Spain right there. And they're controlling New Orleans, right where the Mississippi comes out into the Gulf of Mexico. So we send a man named Thomas Pinckney. Thomas Pinckney goes down there and makes a deal with Spain. Oh, well, what do we get out of that? Now, this is 1795. So a lot of things happened in 1795. Boy, it must have been a great year or a worst year. I don't know. How do you want to say it? That Americans are permitted to use the Mississippi River, and the boundaries are set between United States and Spanish territories by that river. So, in other words, they're going to leave us alone. Now, we were being charged all kinds of taxes and all kinds of ways to get things off of us by trying to use the Mississippi River. That's supposed to be done, and it is. So, nobody owns the Mississippi, basically. We can both use it for right now. Eventually, you know who's going to own it. Good old USA. Oh, yes, we're going to own it. We're going to take it. But in that time, they did have some worries about it. But that's okay. Thomas Pinckney, he come back with a treaty called the Pinckney's Treaty. Pinckney's Treaty. And that was between us and Spain. And everything was settled for a while. Everything's for a while. It's never forever. You know that. Now, where does that leave all the Native Americans at? Oh, they're still upset. Yep, in that Northwest Territory, guess what? The British are still, they are still supporting arms. Now, in that Jay Tree, the British were supposed to leave all of their forts in the territory. Well, they already decided that in 1783 after the Revolution. And guess what? They didn't do it. They didn't do it. So they're going to do it now, 1795. You think they did? No, they didn't. They still didn't. They would be there for, oh, I'd say another 15 years or so. And the Native Americans were taking guns and ammunition, and it still was a little bit messy in this Ohio Valley. Now, we had that treaty at Greenville. That helped a little bit, but we had to move on. Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. What are we going to do? It's been a rough day, I'll tell you. It's been a rough day just thinking about all this stuff to tell y'all. There's so much stuff to tell you. I just don't think I have time, but I'm giving you a little synopsis. Maybe I'll help you out a little bit and send you some things that you can read. Maybe you can watch a little bit and decide for yourself. All right. But I do have one more thing to tell you, and that's about George Washington. Well, during Washington's 2 terms in office, he established a firm foundation He established a new national government. He made the president's office very, very strong. Remember everything he did. He set a precedence. Remember what that word means? Precedence? It means example for all the other presidents to follow. And they do. They still do. By deciding not to seek re-election in 1796, he set a standard for all presidents to run for 2 terms. Now, in 1941, I believe there's going to be a president named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he's going to run for how many terms? 1, 2, 3, 4. They're going to stop that. There's going to be an amendment to the Constitution. It's going to stop that. But that's for you to learn in another year or so, not for me. I'm not even born yet. Now, many people encouraged Washington to run for a 3rd term, and he said, no, I'm done. He said, I just can't. I want to go back to Mount Vernon. I want to become a farmer like I was supposed to years ago. And Martha agreed. She really did. So in 1796, he gave it up and he went back home. Now, who would take over as president? Actually, John Adams, his vice president, would become the 2nd president of the United States. Was he a good president? I thought he was pretty good. He did some things he probably shouldn't have, but he was pretty good, and he kept us out of a war again. Boy, it seems like everybody wants to fight us, and we just don't want to fight. We don't need to fight. Best thing to do, let them fight on their own. So Washington was in office for 8 years. And when he left a farewell address. Now, his farewell address was not something that was like today. His farewell address was all written out, put in a newspaper, people to read. And he warned about a couple things. There's many things, but there's 2 in particular that I want you to pay attention to. First of all, he said, watch out for decisive or divisive, I should say, political parties. You see, there was no Republicans and Democrats back in those days. Now, we could say there was Federalists and Anti-Federalists, but no Democrats and Republicans like today. Washington said, watch out, because when you start having political parties, you're going to have a division in this country. Sound familiar? He was right, wasn't he? Absolutely right. For all these years, there's always been a little bit of a division because there's competition. Competition is good. People got to have different viewpoints, and I agree. We should have the parties, but sometimes it gets a little nasty, maybe too nasty. Second thing that he talked about was this: there are dangerous conflicts between the North and South because they have different interests, and it may cause a war. Wow! Guess what? 1861, there was a war. And it was between people in the North and the people in the South. How did Washington know that? He could see it coming all the way back in 1796. He knew it was happening. Now, where was he from? He was from the South. He was from Virginia. And he saw what was happening. The interest in the North and the interest in the South are 2 different things. You can't make one like the other. That's exactly what would start to happen. And it was already happening. And this was only 1796. Imagine. It would be another 70 years and it would come true. That's a shame. Well, I'm going to leave you go right now because I've already got 34 minutes. 34 minutes. But I do want to leave you with this. We are going through some rough times. But you know, old Zeke here, I've gone through a lot of things. Gone through war, gone through pestilence, diseases, the Great Fever of 1793. A lot of people died, a lot of people sick. But you know what? We can all make it through this. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. You can make it. We'll all make it. We'll all be good. Stay together. You understand? And just keep on reading. Read and read and read. And you'll find out what the truth really is. So I'll be seeing y'all soon. It will probably be Monday. I think Monday. Maybe I'll ask one of my other cousins to come in and talk to you Monday. We'll see. You might get tired of seeing his face. But we'll see you on Monday, and you all have a good day. Bye.